All right, welcome back to the Exo18 Leadership Podcast. This is Kelly Sherpy, and I am here with our fearless co-founders, Ed and Christy Ivy.
Such a big claim.
Big claim.
Fearless.
It's great to be here. It's great to be here.
We also have our incredible guest with us today, part of the Exo18 leadership team,
Brian.
Yes.
Brian. Welcome
Brian
back.
McNabb.
Brian
Hey, it's good to
McNabb.
be here with you guys. Thanks for including me.
Yes.
Well, we are excited to be back with our next podcast. We've got a great conversation today around challenging leadership conversations. Bum, bum, bum. I feel like we need the
some
effects over
sounders.
there. Yeah, right,
Yeah.
Brian?
Yes.
Well, I think this is a conversation I've been excited to have with this group because I feel like this is, I don't know, really hinges on a lot of success in your ability to be, as a leader, to be able to address different scenarios and have challenging or what may be difficult or uncomfortable conversations, whether that's around having to give feedback, constructive criticism, maybe even letting someone go. But, those conversations can be really transformative and hopefully on the front end can bring resolution and understanding. Unfortunately, on the back end, maybe it brings something like a conclusion.
Resolution.
Resolution in another way, right?
Wah, wah.
So I think these conversations can look a little bit different, but I think we all understand, the weight that we all feel walking into a challenging conversation, right, with another party. So I don't know, Christy, do you have a definition or any other guidelines around what those conversations might be?
A definition. I do have something written down.
I figured
How
you
did
would.
you guess,
I
Kelly?
figured. It's pretty on brand for you, Christy.
Yeah, it is. That in notes and lists.
Absolutely.
Which I love. So my definition would be an authentic conversation where we identify an issue or a challenge in a respectful way. I think that should be a goal in order to seek understanding and resolution with an agreement from all parties that we're going to hold one another accountable.
Okay.
All right.
Great definition. Brian, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah. I think you mentioned on the front end, that's the goal. But on the back end, that's still the goal.
Wow.
Right?
That's cool.
Because there's resolution, whether we want to keep you on the team, we just want to see you progress and move forward. Or there's resolution because, well, this has resolved itself and we're going to move forward. Right?
Great point.
Oh, man.
So the end result that we're always looking for
Is
in a
moving forward.
challenging conversation is resolution.
Yeah, and moving forward, I would
Resolution,
say.
yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, I think, these can be, again, they're challenging. They make us uncomfortable. Nobody likes to have a hard conversation.
Yeah, they're
with someone.
unfun.
They're not fun.
Ooh, yeah.
If you find them fun, I know a great therapist.
Maybe you're very confrontational.
You might, we might have some work to do there.
Let us know. Ed will come see you.
Yes.
Right.
And,
We're going
And
to
have a hard
coach up,
conversation with you.
coach up what's going on.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, let's just, I think most people that are listening to us, they understand, they can probably define themselves what a challenging conversation would be. And they're like, yep, get it. But let's just maybe, what are a couple of examples of, when would be the time to have, obviously termination. I mean, when you're terminating somebody, that is a hard conversation. But and I think probably our listeners that are in those key leadership roles, their minds immediately go there. But there are other times that we have these challenging conversations that we need to have prior to those moments. And if we had these conversations prior to the last conversation, it might not ever get there. So what are some examples of when we might have some of these?
Kelly, you threw some out earlier when we were brainstorming, and I just loved your quick responses.
What were they?
Well, one was when somebody's underperforming. I was like, go Kelly.
Well, I think that's an obvious one. If we're talking about a leadership context, you've got direct reports, you've got people that you're working with on different teams. So I think anytime there's underperformance or there is an issue in performance, or maybe there was, somebody dropped the ball and you got to figure something out. I think those are all those are all scenarios where some of these difficult conversations can have. But if I were to just maybe back up just a second, I have a leader that, to this day, I still use this. All right. And so anytime that I bring on a new person that's working under me, this leader did a great job of framing the expectation for hard conversations when I first started working with them. And so he laid out the inevitable. Listen, Kelly, at some point, we're going to have a hard conversation. And when that happens, I can do one of two things. I can either paint or I can point. You tell me how you like to receive feedback best.
See, I would say paint, please paint.
See, and I said point.
Oh,
But see, I get lost in the details. So if someone is trying to paint a picture and I'm like, where are you going with this? I have a hard time figuring out like, okay, what's the bottom line? What
I
are
was
you trying
about to
tell me?
say, have you ever, as a leader, you've had those conversations in the past, and I know early in not wanting to be clear, I wanted to be clear, but I wanted to make sure I wrapped it like with a lot of grace and mercy and and as a result, you get into conversation. It's like, okay, can you tell me exactly what you're trying to say?
Right.
Am I doing good? Is that what you're saying? Or am I being reprimanded or fired? Or like, I don't know what.
Clear as
so your watercolor palette got all muddy.
Oh man, it was a mess by the end. And I'm a point person.
Right.
But when you're the initiator of it, or you're the one leading that, I think sometimes it's difficult.
It is.
It's
But
really
what I appreciated in that conversation was, number one, setting the expectation that at some point we will have a hard conversation.
Yeah.
And so that immediately just
It's
lowers your
life.
anxiety and
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, this is just
Normal.
part of this is
Yeah.
normal, right? We're gonna have hard conversations. I welcome feedback, right?
Right.
So that was for me, just really put a lot of ease in the relationship, right? And then asking my preference, and he was really clear to say, now I operate one of these two ways, and so it may not be the same way you do. So I'm going to try really hard to communicate in a way that makes sense to you, but I might not hit the target.
Yeah.
Can you give me grace in that? And I was like, I appreciate the fact that you just
Yeah.
even were forward enough to even
Yeah.
say that, right? And so then it just kind of created an atmosphere for a lot of grace and conversation to happen. So I still use that to this day when I get someone new that's working with me or working under me, to at least set the framework. Now I've got a framework to work within, and we've already like cleared a lot of the awkwardness, right? Because these conversations, I feel like awkwardness always gets in the way.
Yeah.
Right? Like on the giving end, nobody wants to be mean most of the time, or like you said, like in the attempt to be kind, sometimes we get murky.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes just lowering the awkwardness in the environment is like, oh,
And I think
we just moved the
normalizing-
ball up, 25 yards on that.
Normalizing that it's going to happen, and this
Right.
doesn't equal failure.
Right.
I'm so much harder on myself than anybody else could be, and if someone normalizes it for me and helps put it in context, then it's going to be a lot easier for me.
Right. Right.
But you and I even are just wired completely different.
We are. But I feel like we can communicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
I paint, you point.
Yeah. And we figured out a little dance
Yeah.
that works.
Yes.
I love it. I love it.
I think it's too understanding for those of us that it's unfun for everybody, but some leaders, like, it's the end of the world for them to have a difficult or challenging conversation. Like, they sweat it for weeks. They build it up in their mind, and they've had that conversation in the mirror 10 times and in the rearview mirror while they're driving to home. And that to remember as the person that struggles to really go ahead and pull the trigger on that conversation, not firing or whatever, but to remember that professional criticism isn't personal criticism.
Right.
That's
Like,
good.
professional feedback does not equal I'm criticizing you as a human.
Right.
And if they're a paint person or a point person, as the leader, I've got to figure out, okay, this is how I communicate clearly, because clear is kind, in a way that you understand and receive, but is also, I've still got to do it as the leader. I've still got to do
Right.
it. And so it takes recognition of, when do I have that? Okay, earlier, like you said, don't let little monsters become big monsters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Just
Yeah.
get to it as fast as you can.
Yeah, that's good.
And I may be stepping out on or getting out on a limb here a little bit, but my guess would be the majority of people that would be listening to us that are leaders, pastors, CEOs, whoever those kind of top executive level positions would be, probably right now, my guess, 75% of them probably have a hard conversation, a challenging conversation that they need to have that they've been putting off.
Yeah.
That they've been like right now. And I know somebody's in the car, they're like,
Oh,
Man,
yeah.
Dagger to the heart.
Like,
Just called me
avoiding
out.
is just
and
the
here's,
worst.
And here's
Right.
and here's the reason why is because we start weighing it out and we create these scenarios in our mind of what's going to happen and what it's going to be like, or we're afraid of the risk that's involved.
Oh.
And I would say that's probably the bigger of the two because, and I'll tell you from pastoring, the one thing that I always struggled with is knowing that in those conversations and the decisions that you're making, that it always has impact.
Right.
That it always has, that there's just obviously a lot of people that are always impacted by the things you do and say and decisions that are made. And so when I needed to have those conversations, those difficult conversations, it's like I just wanted to avoid them because it was the unknown part of it that I knew there was a risk. What happens? Because if I have this conversation with this individual, what's going to happen? Collateral is collaterally.
It works.
What is the
Collateral
collateral
damage.
damage?
Right.
Okay, let me say that again. So if I have that conversation that I know I need to have with that particular person, in my head, I am saying, what is the collateral damage associated with that?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, in fairness, the majority of the times, it wasn't nearly what I thought it would
Right.
be,
Right.
But there's that part of it there, you just get scared of what the potential fallout might be,
Right.
What is it going to impact our giving? Is it going to impact our team? Is it going to, impact my family? Is it going to impact, these leaders or this group of volunteers? And we end up not making decisions. We end up not having those conversations when we need to have them, and then it just builds frustration.
Yeah. I think that's just a really good component to add into the mix because there is that option of it, like really assessing, okay, how we have the conversation and then what?
Right.
Right. Did I just create more work for everyone or we've got to clean up?
You don't want any fallout,
Yeah,
obviously.
you
But
don't want fallout.
I do think that we've got some great models that we've found in our own lives that do reduce, emotional fallout, and that actually where I think people do appreciate authenticity, and everybody wants to be seen, to be known, and to be loved. And I think if we just reframe a little bit these challenging conversations in our own mind, that we realize really we can actually become closer with that team member, and we can find resolution together, and we can actually walk away from this both feeling very relieved. With knowing more, having more information, and hearing one another's hearts.
I think I heard Max Lucado, I think it was, say, conflict is inevitable, combat is optional.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
And if we have that understanding, like Kelly said at the beginning, setting that from the beginning. Look, we're gonna bump noses at some point. Something's gonna go wrong. You're gonna be late on a deadline. Whatever.
Right.
We're gonna have to have a corrective or coaching conversation, however you want to say that, and reframe that in our minds of I'm coaching, I'm correcting, so for the betterment of right. Because to what Ed was saying, there's going to be potentially collateral damage, but if we'll coach it before it gets big, maybe there's collateral blessing. Maybe there's collateral movement forward, and we see a better version of that person.
Yeah,
That's
so good.
That's good.
So powerful.
I do think when we're talking about coaching situations, coaching corrective feedback, I think there's such an opportunity for transformation to happen out of that conversation if it's done well.
Yeah.
Right. If it's done well. I know some of I think the most growth that I've had in my professional career has come out of some of those coaching conversations and has really challenged me to come up to another level. And so I've appreciated the people in my life that have handled those really well, where I felt challenged rather than, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, reprimanded, right? So I appreciate the nuance in leadership when those are done well.
Yeah.
And before we transition, I know we want to get to a place where we're sharing some insightful application. But before we head in that direction, Kelly, I just wanted to bring up and say, and the kind of the obvious, but something that I think we don't often point out as the obvious, is that there is a different dynamic involved, in my opinion. I'd like to hear your opinion, Kelly, between a male having a challenging conversation and a female leading a challenging conversation in the workplace. So I know that was definitely something I had to personally practice. I know we are wired differently. So I kind of came at it from a place where I did not want to have those conversations. And then I tried to overcompensate. And so I ended up probably being a little too aggressive. And so I think there is another dynamic for female leaders, and we're seeing more and more female leaders in executive C-suite places. So Kelly, speak to that.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many thoughts, and I won't share them all here today.
Yeah.
But you know what? I have found, interestingly, having worked in a couple of different arenas in the business world and higher education, church, ministry, nonprofit, some of my most challenging conversations as a leader that have been maybe the most poorly received have been me as a female leader having to have a hard conversation, a challenging conversation with someone that was a male. And, for whatever reason in church world, there's a little bit of different framework around that where some folks have a hard time, depending on their theology, in receiving those well. And so I think it creates another layer, I think, as a female, of having to think through how to have the conversation well, how to do it in the most respectful way, how it can be received well. And I don't know about you. I mean, we're wired a little bit differently. I'm probably a little more, I know that I can come across as intimidating. I'm a former, Division I professional volleyball player. Like, my stature can be intimidating to people. So I have to be very, that's an extra layer for me that I have to be very aware of, that that does not come across as aggressive.
Yeah.
Because it's never received well when that's the interpretation.
Yeah. But I think we have some models that for application that work well with male and female leaders.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, awesome. So have you guys had any, maybe when you were younger leaders, did you ever experience some extra layers of tension in having some of those challenging conversations?
Go ahead.
Go for it.
I think if you lead a business of one, you're going to have a hard conversation with even yourself, right? So no matter the leadership level, large church, small church, volunteer, whatever. But I guess to your question, because when I was a young leader, I allowed little things to grow and fester, and I let awkwardness develop, and they would add layers. And the longer I waited, the layers got thicker. Yeah. And you couldn't cut through, and then you started avoiding each other in the hall, and then you start whatever. Yeah. And so those layers, because I wanted to be nice and kind, I wouldn't just be clear.
Wow.
Forgetting that clear is kind.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would allow things like that to fester too long. So that was my personal experience, and then I got over it.
Yeah. That's good.
I had to work at it, but I got over it.
And now here you are.
Yeah, well, I don't know if here I am, but we're still improving.
Right.
I'm a recovering delayer.
I don't know that anybody's great, great at this, and you just learn. You make mistakes, you mess up, you do it wrong, you learn from that and take it, but I recently, this is about 2 weeks ago, was involved with a very, very hard conversation, hard leadership conversation. And it was really difficult because I was on the receiving end of it. I was not the one leading it. And it was actually God
Oh,
Oh.
I was like, what? I don't recall you telling me about this.
And this popped up in my head as we were just kind of talking about this, because I
Wow.
told Christy about it. And I would love to tell you the story of it, but it is so personal.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Wow.
but there were some things that I was expressing to the Lord in prayer time and everything. And just in a loving, stern way, he addressed me.
Wow.
And he spoke to me, and not even in a statement, but in a question. And in that question, I was like, okay, all right, but I think of that model, and I think about how many times the Lord has had to discipline me in my life, and had to have those hard conversations where, like, come on, Ed, I love you. And what is the heart that he has in it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if I can think that way
Yeah.
when I'm stepping into one of those conversations where I know I have to lead one of those, or I've got to have one of those with somebody, how does he do that with me?
Yeah.
What do I know what I feel in it, but am I able to communicate in the same way to someone as he is to me? Do I still capture love, care, even if it's as hard as termination,
Correction. Right.
whatever that is, or, it is, am I able to do it with the same heart as Jesus does with me?
Wow.
But yeah,
That was pretty-
Should we just mic drop right
Mic
here?
drop.
and
That was a
close
mic
it
drop
out?
moment.
there was my
Yeah.
vulnerable moment.
There
And,
he
That
is.
was,
That
yeah.
was very.
and Christy knows the story that I'm talking about. She was like, "Ooh,
He does have a way of asking us those questions.
wow." He's like,
that
"Hey,
just get
Ed, what
to the
yeah,
point.
because he was just like, "Do you like that?" And I'm like, "Man, Lord, man, it was. I mean, it was that pointed, but it came across in such, the way he, quote unquote, dealt with me, or had that talk with me,
Yeah.
was just, it was amazingly awful
Amazingly awful.
because it revealed something in me,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, Ed, though, the way that you just shared that, and Brian, you kind of touched on it, is that I think it's important to be thoughtful and prayerful about these conversations prior to having them. And, I think that as we evaluate our own heart in it,
Yeah.
and what the goal is, and kind of lay out a loose plan, if you will, of okay, this is, I'm gonna clearly define the challenge, and then I'm gonna make sure I go into this with my heart right. I'm gonna share an example. I'm gonna share how I feel emotionally about this situation. Then I'm going to give the other party a chance to share their reality. Because let's face it, we only have one perspective.
That's true.
So I'm going to hear from them. And I think when we kind of lay out a plan, it goes. I mean, the conversations I've had that have been challenging where I have laid out that plan and I have prayed in advance and I've waited on the Lord to say, okay, now is the moment. And there, quite honestly, there have been some times that he said, I'll let you know, tomorrow's not the time,
Right.
and he's wanted me to pray about it a few more days. So, and then there's times that he said, in 5 minutes is the time, So I think there is value to thinking through and praying through these things prior. What are some of y'all's thoughts?
Yeah, we can't, when we step into these conversations and we leading these conversations, we have to remember also that we only have the ability to control ourselves.
It's true.
We can't control we can't control how somebody else responds. In that we can only, it's, our words, our heart,
Yeah.
our spirit in it. And that's what we're responsible for more so than the outcome, I would say, because
Right.
I can't control the outcome,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we need to understand and not put the pressure of how they respond on ourselves.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that is good.
I do think too, as pastors and in church organizations, if you go to 1 Peter chapter 5, right, it says care for the flock. Like we have a responsibility to steward the flock. Well, the flock we always think of as the congregants, but really it's our staff as well. We have a responsibility to care for them. So even if we have a challenging conversation or a corrective or whatever, like we still have to have that stewardship shepherd's heart, kind of what you were saying, towards even our staff, even if they're close, even if they've messed up and whatever, made mistakes or delayed or whatever, to be careful not to be so corporate minded that we forget that we're pastoring them too. Yes, we have to lead. Yes, we have to realize employee, employer, all the things. But 1 Peter 5 is like care for the flock, and they're a part of our flock as well.
Brian, you just touched on something. I'm so glad this came up, because when you look at the corporate world and then you look at organizations in a faith-based context, there's another layer of dynamics to those challenging conversations, and that is that we're in community with these people, and they are our flocks.
That's true.
And that doesn't make it as cut and dry as a corporation.
Yeah. The lines blur for sure, but that's why what Ed said is so important. What you guys have been alluding to through the whole time is we've got to have our heart right.
Yeah.
So that when we go into that conversation, that we're really just following what we believe the Lord is leading us to do and say, because we're trying to care for his church, care for his bride, care for the overall progress of that organization, as a church, as a team, all the things. We've got to protect it. And so when we go in with the heart of a shepherd, we have all of those things as a responsibility, as a pastor, as a nonprofit organizational leader. There's still a ministry heart behind that. And you've got to have your heart really in the hand of the Lord. I always say it like this with my team. I'm like, let your heart connect to God's heart, and then just repeat what you hear him say.
Yeah, and we will unpack this a little bit more in our blog. And there'll be some pretty broad strokes, but how to prepare for and how to have a challenging conversation. So it'll just be some simple application for you to be able to utilize and implement. But we want to encourage you to check that out. And any final thoughts? Anybody?
Don't be afraid to do it.
Yeah.
Conquer that fear.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite leadership principles when it comes to, and I say this all the time, I feel like to every client I work with, is make the covert overt. Right. So like, I feel like a lot of times there's tension or awkwardness, and we sense that and we feel it, but we never actually just come out and address it.
Right.
And when we do that, it just brings an opportunity for so much clarity and understanding to happen. So if you walk away with one thing, I feel like that's my nugget to keep dropping on people. Make the covert overt. If you sense that tension, go have a conversation and just bring it up, right? Put it on the table. Hey, I'm sensing this. Do we have an issue that we need to talk about? Right. It could be as simple as that to alleviating some of that tension.
I love it. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Christy. We want to encourage you to check us out also if you want more information about Exo18, who we are, how we can help you move from where you are to where you want to be. We'd love to connect with you. Exo18, exo18.com. Hit us up on there on our contact page, or you can connect. We'd love to connect with you on Facebook, the Book of Faces, Exo18, or the Gram at Exo18 Strategy. We'd love to be able to talk to you. Feel free to shoot us any comments or questions or anything like that. We'll get back to you. So I'll look forward to connecting with you next week on our next episode. Hope you have an amazing week. God bless.